The next knowledge point I think is very interesting and very useful is we call risk budgeting. So what is the objective of risk budgeting? The risk budgeting in asset allocation is to use the risk efficiently in pursuit of return. Right? So in other words, we're going to use the asset allocation to budget the risk so that we're able to define an optimal portfolio. Therefore, we can actually control the risk through hedging behavior. So the risk budgeting specify the total amount of risk, right? Specify the total amount of risk. How do they allocate to each asset class? So in other words, more precisely saying is that how much how much of that total risk should be budgeted for each allocation. All right. So that means that we use the optimal allocation that we can distribute, all right, to of the risk to each asset class so that we can reach the optimal solution. Okay. So how do we do that one? What I like to do is using the example to show you. So what is that? Now, first of all, here we like to do here is use an example which already reached the optimal solution, the optimal allocation. But first of all, how do we define the optimal allocation through the based on the concept of risk budgeting? To do that, we rely on a ratio. This ratio is this. The numerator is the excess return of asset class. Remember excess return. For example, here we get an example. We have three asset class: equity, bond, and cash. The excess return here is the return of expected return, required return of equity minus risk-free rate. 6.5%, 3.7%. Of course, the cash equivalent portfolio asset class has zero excess return. So which means the excess return is the risk premium concept. So for cash, there's no risk. Therefore, the risk premium is zero. Therefore, that means that the numerator is risk premium. The denominator is the marginal contribution to risk of the portfolio. So this is the risk, right, or proportion or the attribution of risk on that particular asset class. So the ratio meaning that is the premium to compensate that marginal risk. All right. So that is the marginal risk compensation. The condition is that, okay, if we use that one to calculate in each class, for example, in here, on the right hand side, now we use the risk premium divided by, all right, divided by, we call the marginal contribution, right, to the total risk. In this case, this is optimal solution. We find that for the risky asset class, equity and bond, they both equal to 0.42. In this case, we have the optimal allocation. Therefore, the key is this: is when this ratio, all right, on each class are equal to each other, then we reach the optimum allocation in terms of the risk budgeting. All right, then how do we calculate this NCTR? All right, the marginal contribution to risk of the portfolio. TR means total risk, right? Total risk. So here the procedure is this, right? Just always remember that. First, we're going to use the beta coefficient, but remember this beta is not to the market portfolio beta. This beta is the beta to your own portfolio. Therefore, the beta altogether is equal to 1 for that particular portfolio. So equity had 1.3 to the portfolio, zero point 0.7 is the bond beta to the portfolio, where cash has zero risk. So the correlation to the portfolio is zero, so it's a zero beta. So which means that these beta serve as the contribution indicator, right? The sensitivity or the contribution or the attribution to the total portfolio risk. Now it's more like a systematic risk. So, so this is the attribution, right? Then the risk of the portfolio is calculated by the standard deviation of the portfolio, 12%. So if I use the 1.3 times 12%, I get 15.6%. That is the marginal contribution, right, of the total risk for the portfolio from equity class. Okay, that makes sense. Now, there's another terminology called the absolute contribution to the total risk, the ACRT. So ACRT is equal to the weight of the class times the marginal contribution to total risk of the class. For example, in here, the weight, right, for this optimum portfolio, we got 60% on equity. So 60% of the NCRT, it is the absolute contribution to the total risk, 9.4%. And then we calculate each one, all right, NCRT, MCTR, and then the ACTR. Here's 0 and 0. Then obviously the sum of the ACTR is the risk of the portfolio, 12%. 12%. See, that is the portion of that. Okay, so total risk is 12%. Well, equity had a 9.4% contribute to that, related to that, actually cost that 12%. That amount of 12%, 9.4% is from equity class. Therefore, the equity contribute 78%, right, of the risk for the portfolio. Portfolio 100%, right? Bond at 22%, and 0%, of course, from the cash. So what is this? This is what we call risk budget. The risk budget, right? Risk budget is that what? If we, this is a typical example, right? We know the optimal allocation 60-30-10, right? Now, there's a 10% there's no risk. Cash have no risk. So we want to hedge the risk of this portfolio by using futures contract, like we're going to short a futures contract. And there's the equity futures contract, right? There's a bond futures contract. What is the proportion of that short? But the risk budget, because equity contributes 78% of risk. That's reason why if we get $100, we need to short $78 in the equity, $22 in the bond, so that I can protect 100% of my portfolio risk, even though my allocation is only 60, 30, and 10. Many people thought we just use, if it's 60, then we use 60, right? Suppose we have $100, 60% in the $60 in equity, so we want to hedge the equity risk. We just use what? $60 futures contract. We short that. Wrong. You have to short 78%, $78 in order to balance your risk. So this is the beauty of using risk budget for risk management and hedging purpose. Very good example.